Today on Bench Briefs, we're looking at a fascinating and important case that explores the complex relationship between Indigenous fishing rights and commercial fishing regulations in Canada. The case is Regroupement des pêcheurs professionnels du Sud de la Gaspésie Inc. versus the Listuguj Mi'gmaq Government, decided by the federal court in 2026. This case sheds light on how Aboriginal and treaty rights apply to commercial fishing, a topic that affects both Indigenous communities and non Indigenous fishers alike. So, what's this case about? At its core, it's a dispute between a group representing professional fishermen from southern Gaspesie, a region in Quebec, and the Listuguj Mi'gmaq Government, an Indigenous authority. The fishermen's group challenged the Mi'gmaq's right to fish commercially in a specific area. The Listuguj Mi'gmaq claim their right to fish commercially is protected under Aboriginal and treaty rights recognized in Canadian constitutional law. The case raises important questions about what those rights really mean when it comes to commercial fishing activities. Here's how things unfolded. The Regroupement des pêcheurs professionnels du Sud de la Gaspésie Inc. That's a mouthful, so we'll just call them the Regroupement, brought the case to the federal court's trial division. They argued that the Listuguj Mi'gmaq Government shouldn't be allowed to fish commercially in the disputed waters, essentially challenging the scope of the Mi'gmaq's claimed rights. On the other side, the Listuguj Mi'gmaq maintained that their rights to fish commercially are constitutionally protected, based on treaties and long-standing Indigenous practices. Aside from the core dispute over fishing rights, the case also involves some procedural questions about how evidence was presented in court. Specifically, the use and admissibility of affidavits, sworn written statements, came under scrutiny. This is important because affidavits can be a key part of how parties support their claims in legal battles, especially in complex Aboriginal rights litigation. Now, let's break down the key legal issues the court had to decide. First, the court needed to determine whether the Listuguj Mi'gmaq Government actually holds constitutionally protected Aboriginal or treaty rights to fish commercially in the area at issue. This is a big question because while Aboriginal rights to fish for food, social, and ceremonial purposes are well established, the extension of those rights to commercial fishing is more complicated and less settled. The second issue was about the scope and extent of any recognized Aboriginal or treaty fishing rights. Even if the Mi'gmaq do have fishing rights, do those rights include commercial fishing or are they limited to non-commercial activities? This distinction matters a great deal for regulating fisheries and managing resources fairly. The third issue concerned the jurisdiction of the federal court itself. The court had to confirm whether it had the authority to hear and decide disputes involving Aboriginal and treaty rights related to fishing. This is a procedural but crucial question because jurisdiction determines which court can resolve these sometimes sensitive and complex issues. Finally, the court examined procedural questions about affidavits, whether they could be admitted and relied upon in this kind of litigation. Since affidavits can shape the factual record and influence the outcome, their proper use is essential for a fair trial. So, why does this case matter beyond the immediate dispute? It highlights the ongoing challenges in balancing Indigenous rights with commercial interests in natural resources. Fishing is not just an economic activity. For many Indigenous communities, it's deeply tied to culture, identity, and survival. At the same time, commercial fisheries involve many stakeholders and economic livelihoods that depend on clear rules and fair access. This case also underscores the evolving nature of Canadian constitutional law when it comes to Aboriginal and treaty rights. Courts continue to grapple with how to interpret these rights in modern contexts, especially as Indigenous communities seek to assert their rights to participate fully in the economy, including through commercial ventures. Moreover, the procedural aspects remind us that how legal evidence is handled can have a big impact on the protection and recognition of Indigenous rights. Fair and effective legal processes are key to resolving these disputes in a way that respects all parties involved. In the bigger picture, Regroupement des pêcheurs professionnels du Sud de la Gaspésie Inc. Listuguj Mi'gmaq Government is part of a broader conversation about reconciliation, resource management, and Indigenous self-determination in Canada. It illustrates the court's role in navigating these complex and often sensitive issues, shaping the landscape for future cases and policies. Thanks for listening to this episode of Bench Briefs. Be sure to join us next time for another dive into important Canadian legal decisions and what they mean for our communities and our country. Until then, take care.